Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey Webb, and I'm Marketing Director here at Churn Zero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled The 5 Customer Love Languages. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording today's session, and a link to the recording will be available 24 hours after this webinar. Throughout the presentation, you're welcome to submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will address as many as we can during the Q&A portion of the webinar, and we'll also keep an eye on it as we go through the presentation. And now I'm pleased to introduce to you our speaker today, Bob London. Bob is the founder and CEO of Chief Listening Officers that teaches CS teams how to have more strategic customer conversations to enhance relationships, revenue, and retention. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Bob.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Corey. Great to see you again. It's been a couple years since we last shared the stage, the virtual stage together. I am super excited to be here today speaking with everybody. And I want to thank Corey and Churn Zero, not only for setting this up, but I wanted to get in, I'll get into this a little bit later, but Churn Zero, I think, is a great example of a company that does a phenomenal job of speaking their customers' love language. And this webinar being an example where it's not a webinar to talk all about Churn Zero and to go down checklists of features. It's really, I think the topic today shows that Churn Zero has a much more holistic understanding of what's going on with its audience in terms of challenges and priorities, and just gives away a ton of insight and knowledge. So I appreciate being part of that. And that is the point of today's conversation. Is one of your priorities, if you're here, is to kind of maximize your understanding of customers, again, in a sort of a more holistic way, with the eye towards keeping them and growing them in the best possible way for as long as we can. And this is my third event with Churn Zero. I'm looking forward to making this one the best yet. Each one does seem to get better, I have to say, as you'll see. So I encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A and comments, and I will kind of keep looking to the side every so often if I see some movement over here. And I want you to feel free to react, questions or comments, and I'll get to as many of them as I can. If not right away, then we'll go back towards the end and open it up. So with that said, I forgot to show you the little Churn Zero heart here. Is coming in here. This Churn Zero. It's Valentine's Day coming up. Don't forget to buy gifts for those if you have loved ones. I know I do. Speaking of loved ones, I'm going to get very personal with you for a couple minutes. I'm going to tell you a story. I promise it has to do with what we're talking about today from a business standpoint. So it's about my love journey with my wife of 25 years. So yes, I've been married for 25 plus years. So I'm imagine you're applauding just as you would if I were a stand-up comedian. It's like, yeah, I've been married for 25 years. It's quite an accomplishment. So when my wife backs out of our garage at the house, she's facing the house. As she backs out, once in a while, she looks at the house, and this is what, in her mind, this is what I think she actually sees. And then a minute later, I get a call from her in the car, and she says, first I hear, and I know it's going to be something that I have to do. She says, the house, it's just falling apart. It's a disaster. I mean, I think the neighbors are going to call the police and they're going to condemn it. It just looks horrible. It's embarrassing. Can you just at least go out today and just do something, do some weeding or something, just tidy it. It just looks awful. And so I go outside and I see something a little different. This is not an actual picture of a house, but it just makes the point. I see something a little different. It doesn't look quite so dramatically bad to me. I don't know. Maybe it's just a thing that I just don't see things the way she does. And that is the point, actually. But I don't know what all the fuss is about. So sometimes I would kind of ignore it. And then my wife would come home and she'd look at the house and say, well, I guess nothing happened to the house while I was gone, and I guess I'll have to do it myself. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, not a love language situation. What I learned, though, was that if I take it upon myself to go outside, maybe grab some gardening gloves and a shovel, maybe a wheelbarrow, and then she pulls into the driveway and sees me out there working, it's a whole different conversation. It goes more like this. I'll hear her say like, "Oh, sweetie, what did you do? Are you doing work on the house? Oh, it looks so amazing." By the way, the same exact house that she looked at and thought was worth of being condemned. And it looks amazing. You're so sweet. And that is how I discovered one of my wife's love languages. When she sees that I'm taking care of things that are important to her, proactive, and I'm not saying this happens very often, by the way, I'm just telling you that I did learn it though, proactively, without having to be asked, she loves me just a little bit more for on that day at least, and maybe for a few days after. So what I just described to you is something called an act of service. Acts of service is one of the 5 love languages defined by an unbelievable and well-known psychologist and author named Dr. Gary Chapman in his book of the same name, The 5 Love Languages. And the book explains how we all of us experience and define love differently. And to make relationships great, we have to learn each other's love languages. And you can read all the rest of the love languages here, and words of affirmation, receiving gifts, quality time, physical touch. I highly recommend the book, by the way. I've had people, so I make this recommendation as part of many presentations I've done in workshops, and at least 10% of the time when we meet again with a team to get feedback, and they'll tell me how it's going. By the way, that book was amazing. My partner thanked me for reading it and recommending it. So it is a good one. And it does seem to make a lot of sense. Why am I talking about all this today? Because I've made it my mission, for the last 7 or 8 years more broadly, but particularly in the last 2 years, helping companies, mostly technology companies, and particularly customer success and other customer facing folks, to understand their customers' realities, what engages customers, how customers define value on their terms, not ours. What are they saying and thinking when vendors aren't in the room? And as part of my journey, not my love journey, but my business journey, I've done about 2,600 customer discovery conversations. I get hired to do listening tours for companies to get an independent perspective on what's happening in the marketplace. And now more recently, as I said, teaching teams how to take the same approach and use it for their own purposes. So when I ran across the concept of the love languages, according to Dr. Gary Chapman, I immediately realized that all those conversations I was having with customers gave me an interesting kind of angle into what they were essentially, yes, customer love languages. How do customers experience and define love, AKA value? And I just want to say that the word language should not be misunderstood. It's not just how you talk to customers. It is the action and delivery of value, AKA love. But I realized very quickly, and if you remember the 5 love languages I just showed you, the Gary Chapman's, just taking his love languages and applying them to customers wouldn't work. I mean, one of them is physical touch, for gosh sake. And I think we can all agree that that's a hard no. That's not one of the customer love languages. Not, at least if we don't want to get in trouble, it's not. So I'm pleased to now launch into my 5 customer love languages. And I look forward to hearing questions and comments along the way so we can have a bit of a dialogue around this. Customer love language number 1. And I'm starting off with one that is, it is the essence of obviousness. And what I mean by that, it's do what you say you're going to do. So that means you as a CSM, if that's what your role is, or even in sales or account management or product, but also your company and your product doing what you say you're going to do. Does your brand mean that you consistently live up to customers' expectations? Is that what customers say when you're not in the room? And now to the right, you're going to see for each of the love language slides, you're going to see this sort of little definitions or sub love languages. And the first 2, I refer to those as table stakes, which basically means if you're not doing these well, don't bother competing, right? Deliver the baseline capabilities and outcomes the customer expects, and be clear, responsive, and easy to do business with. Those are almost platitudes, which is why I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. But then look at the one on the far right, because we're starting to get into now some of the not customer love languages. Make sure your asks have value to the customer. And if you think about it this way, and I know this is this is a very strident way to say this, but is every bullet point of every slide and every QBR really necessary? Does every slide have a so what? Is it worth the customer's precious time? One thing in my customer discovery conversations I hear all the time, is it's beyond just saying do more with less. It's just that people want to no one says I want to grow up to be a software user. They're saying, I just have a job to do. I'm a human being. At the end of the day, I want to feel successful, go home, and then tomorrow I'll come back and, improve a little bit. So that's what their focus is. Their focus should not be learning to use software and helping you prove value so that they renew. And we're going to talk very specifically about that in a few minutes. So I'm going to give you a special bonus for each love language. I'm going to reveal what I call one of my disruptive questions that I use in my many customer discovery conversations. And these questions, there will be 5 love languages. There's 1 or 2 for each one. So you'll have 7 or 8 by the time we're done here. For each love language, the question is really a tool. It's or sort of the key to unlock or uncover the specifics of your customer's love language. And I want you to think about it that way. And I've had situations where I've unveiled these questions in groups and they start using them the very same day. It's one of the great things about this approach that my journey is. You don't have to, it's not very disruptive to your workflows, the customer journeys you've already set up. It doesn't require any technology, any software for you. You can just open your mouth and ask these questions. This one happens to be a beauty. Here it is. What's the biggest thing that surprised you since you signed the contract with us? It's such a simple question. Just ask the question, just let it land. Don't qualify it. Don't explain it. And this is what I call a delta question. If you think of a delta, it means the difference or the gap. The difference between their expectations at the beginning of the relationship, when they signed a licensing agreement or whatever the statement of work, whatever that looks like, the difference between that and what they perceive now. And I want to tell you too that there's a thread of authenticity and transparency throughout these slides and the questions, because the questions are based on how to get customers to talk about the real world. And we have to we have to position it the same way. So asking this question can feel a little bit bold. What's the biggest thing that surprised you? Well, I don't know if I want to know all that. Well, then you're not going to know what the challenges are from the customer's perspective. But having said that, it's notable that I've asked this question hundreds of times, and I would say a little more than half the time, it's a positive surprise. So if you're like me and you have a little bit of a cynical or skeptical personality, maybe I would have been expecting more negatives, but it's half or more than half the time, it's a positive surprise. And so what's interesting about that is when you start hearing positive surprises. I had one client who was asking this question, and over again, they kept hearing, we're just amazed at how quickly we got up and running. We are amazed at how quickly our team was able to use the software. The time to value was terrific. And that is incredibly valuable, not just as a testimonial. I mean, I think it's important as a testimonial. But if you think about how software companies position themselves, a lot of times the positioning and the value proposition starts to sound the same. Multiple competitors in the same space start to maybe blend in a little bit together sometimes. And, it's important to have a differentiator that says, we guarantee you're going to get up and running, and time to value is shorter than anybody in the space. And how do we know that? Because we've asked our customers, and obviously we need to put more substance behind that. But that's how you use a positive surprise outside of the customer success silo into something that can help with marketing or brand, I would say. So this is a super powerful question. Think about using it in your next customer meeting. Maybe you have a meeting this afternoon, you can ask. And it's worth, someone once said to me, Bob, these questions, you have to take a deep breath before you ask some of them. And they said, it's like if you jump in a lake and you're holding onto the dock, and you can't feel the bottom. It's letting go of the dock and knowing that it's going to work out is kind of the feeling. And then it's very exhilarating right after that. So that's what I'll say about that. Customer love language number 2, be real. Talk with us, not at us. So this is gigantic. And on the right, you'll see some of the things that I think some of the speed bumps that get in the way of transparency and authenticity, kind of the enemies of authenticity and transparency. If we are being too scripted, if we feel the need to choreograph every second of every meeting, having a tight agenda that's been scrubbed 6 ways from Sunday, it sort of can squeeze the humanity and spontaneity out of the conversation. And that's where the authenticity happens, where you get insights. I have a great anecdote from a CSM that part of a team I worked with who they were supposed to go out and ask these questions. And then we met again to see how it went. And she said, well, I went to the customer's office and we were going to do it face to face. I said, that's great. And she said, yeah. And then there was a fire alarm. And she said, we all had to run out and we went to a restaurant, and I had all these slides prepared, 20 slides. And we ended up, I didn't feel in the restaurant it was appropriate to open the laptop and start going through slides. So we just talked. And she said, it was the best meeting we've ever had, because the customer at the end said, this is the first time I feel like we've really had a conversation about what's important to us. So I don't mean to over dramatize it. I'm not saying you guys don't know what's important to customers, but I'm saying that there's a lot there that we're not getting because we don't let the conversation breathe. We kind of script a little bit overly scripted. So see what happens when you take a step back and then ask these, what I call disruptive, open-ended questions. They're disruptive because they disrupt the customer's kind of unengaged thought pattern. We use words that they expect, not unexpected. We ask questions about the same stuff we've always asked about. And the disruptive questions are, you can see the customer engaging and waking up when you ask these questions, because they have to actually think about the answers. So, and this is part of the key to authenticity and transparency and being real and talking with customers, not at them, is we have to model that behavior for them. We have to go first. So we have to ask questions that are based in their reality, things we might not normally ask about. So to that point, here is the next bonus disruptive question that I want to share with you. And this is how I ask it, but you can tweak it a little bit. So let me ask you this. If you got a call from a competitor of ours tomorrow, how would you react on a scale of 1 to 5? Let's say 1 is you'd ignore or delete the message, and a 5 is you'd respond pretty quickly to find out what they're up to. What number would you give? And here's how this question relates to and creates transparency and authenticity. Your customers know you have competitors. They know you have competitors. They're getting drip campaigns, ebooks, webinar invitations. They are fully aware. It doesn't mean they're leaving. It just means that they're aware. And they have competitors. So this is the customer's reality. So why? But I think we're kind of trained never to talk about competition unless the customer brings it up. Well, let's not avoid the word competitor. Let's use it as a hook to get customers to engage with us. And the beauty of this is this question. It doesn't even generate answers about competition. It's just really a wedge or a hook to get the customer to talk about their relationship with you, your product, and your company. How do they really feel? So think about it this way. Let's say they say a 5, no matter what number they give, but let's say a 5. So, okay, 5. Well, I appreciate you being so candid. Is there something that you'd be looking for or that a competitor might say that might really get your attention? Something that we should be aware of? Something that would cause you to get back to them? And so, no matter what they say, what answer they give to that part of it, it's helping you understand areas where they might not fully understand the value you're delivering because they're seeking it somewhere else. They're not switching. They're just looking for insights. How are other companies doing this? Could be areas where you need to improve, areas you need to address with, perhaps some sort of innovation or new feature. perhaps you're not delivering fully on the value or outcomes, and that's what they'll talk about. That's what they will end up talking about. And you have it, but they won't talk about it unless you ask that initial disruptive question to kind of break the ice, not in the typical icebreaker like, oh, what flavor of ice cream do you like? Not that kind of icebreaker, but more like a Coast Guard cutter that is cutting through the ice, the frozen ice. That's how these questions work. And something else that really fuels transparency is the box on the far right here. When you commit to, some of you have heard me talk about this before, commit to listening to understand, not listening to respond. And that means listening without jumping in and interrupting the customer's flow in order to, address a point or solve or sell. There are plenty of opportunities to solve or sell during other parts of the conversation. And jumping in to do that while the customer is expressing what's important to them, which is the whole point, sometimes interferes with their feeling of transparency and authenticity. Like, well, if the vendor's just gonna go back to their agenda after I'm done talking, what's the point of being open with them? I thought we were talking about what's important to me. I'm gonna check over here. I see the Q&A thing is lighting up. I think the Be Real thing ties into owning up to mistakes, missteps as well. I've very rarely had a client get really upset. So I want to address that. Thank you, anonymous attendee. That is awesome. I think what I've learned, and what maybe some of you have learned, are that most people in general, I mean, not just customers, but interpersonally, want to be understood and heard. And that if there is a problem, if you start defending, if you start stonewalling, anything like that, and just say, look, I get it. We messed up, or your perception is we messed up, and that's not acceptable. I 100% agree that is, 80% of the battle is diffusing it that way. Now I see a couple questions about advice, and if I can, I want to get to those at the end of the conversation, because some of these are lengthy and they might permit a little bit more time. But thank you. Keep engaging. Someone said, can I see questions posted by other attendees? Jose said that I don't know the answer. I can't. I'll have to defer to Corey on that one. All right. While that's happening. So the next customer love language number 3. Understand the essence of my job, this is in the customer's voice, and help me do it better. Now, I gave Churn Zero as a really good example of this earlier. They are very consistent in looking at their customers, not just as software users, but they see customers in their jobs more holistically. Churn Zero is able to understand the broader priorities and challenges that CSMs and others face. And just they have a more holistic view of their audience. And it's critical really to, as I refer to, opening the aperture to think about your customers' jobs more broadly versus just thinking of them as a user. Again, I'm citing Churn Zero as a great example of that. There may be others that you're familiar with, and maybe your company. As I said before, no one has a goal of being an amazing software user. The goal is to do their job really well. Using your software might be a fraction of their responsibility. It's the outcome of what they're trying to get out of the software that you need to understand. And that's why you need to uncover what I call their one big thing. And here is a bonus disruptive question to help you do just that. And you will understand what I mean by one big thing in a moment. Here's the question that I ask. So I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. So most job descriptions are like a page or two long, single spaced, very dense, full of bullet points and requirements. But a lot of times there's one thing in there that the company is absolutely counting on you and your team to get done this year. Is there one thing like that for you? Just one big thing? And then just stop, go on mute, let the question land. And what's fascinating about this is, well, first of all, you see the logic is many of you might be able to identify with this. Yes, you're supposed to be doing a bunch of stuff, but at the end of the day, what will you be judged on or compensated on? And a lot of times there's one really important thing. And that's, you have to understand what the company needs from you. It's like speaking your company's love language. But what's fascinating too, and the benefit of going on mute, I don't have it near me, but there's this great, I have this lighted mute button that I can actually press, and it reminds me, sometimes I forget I'm on mute. This question gets the customer to not only give you an answer, but you might actually hear them thinking out loud while they're formulating the answer. And that is a fascinating thought process to listen to. And it also shows that they're being transparent with you. They're thinking about it. And what's amazing is they get value out of answering the question because sometimes they hadn't thought about it. In fact, for all the questions I show you, one of the most common responses, the immediate response is, which is good because they're engaging. Then they'll say, that's a good question. No one's ever asked me that before. So you're doing them a little bit of a service by asking the question, and they get to launch into this thought process. And at the end of it, they may themselves, if they didn't already, they have a pretty good understanding of what the one big thing is that the company is counting on them to absolutely get done this year. So when they share their one big thing, so I don't know how often, statistically, that their one big thing happens to be a perfect fit with exactly what your product does and what your value proposition is. But it may be something adjacent to your product or related. And hearing that can help you identify new opportunities for features. So if there's something that you're hearing consistently and your team, your peers are hearing consistently that, yeah, well, we're hearing a lot of customers saying this, but our product doesn't do that. Well, that begs the question, could it? Should it? Should it at least be on a roadmap somewhere or brainstorming? The other kinds of things that come out from this are content ideas for the marketing team. So I'm imagining that it's possible that when Churn Zero goes out and has conversations with customers and they say, like, what's the one big thing? What are you really struggling with? We just need to understand our customers better. We're not really connecting with them. I'm not suggesting this is what your customers say, Corey. And that becomes a content idea for the marketing team. Hey, do we have ways, can we amp up the content on ways to understand our customers' business priorities and outcomes? Well, yeah, we have content on that, but there's also this guy, Bob London, we could bring in to help deliver that message. So, but at a minimum, and this is another key to transparency, you're going to be able to, once you hear their answer, you're going to empathize with what's on their plate, because you might hear them formulating their answer and they go through 5 things like, well, I got, could be this, could be that, but here's the one big thing, or the essence of what their job is. And you can't help. And I think because you're in customer success, you are probably predisposed to be empathetic and generous and open and candid, that you'll feel more empathetic towards what's on their plate, which can only help you serve them better. And empathy is a key to opening up channels, which is another way of saying transparency. So another question, which it's listed here as well. So let me ask you this. What's the one thing that absolutely has to be off your whiteboard in the next 90 days? And again, I spoke before about the Delta questions, the difference between what their job or whiteboard looks like today versus what it needs to look like in 90 days, or you could say 30 days, or you could say, 6 months. And the whiteboard question came during, I conceived that during the beginning of COVID. And the question originally was, what's on your whiteboard now that wasn't there 30 days ago? Because we wanted to get the delta between how their job was changing and how their desired outcomes were changing. And so the whiteboard it's a hook. Everyone knows what a whiteboard is, even if they're not sitting across from one or have one in their home office. Everyone knows what a whiteboard is and what the purpose of it is. And it's a great hook to engage the customer. So I guess between every question or two, I'm going to go back to look at the Q&A. Are these disruptive Jose says, are these disruptive questions used to help figure out the customer love language? Yes. I think so I'm giving you a framework for love languages, right? I'm giving you categories or buckets of love languages. And I think what your job is to fill in the blanks in some cases, is to get to the level of specificity. And I think this will make a little more sense when we get to the next two customer love languages, is use the questions to decode what really helps the customer lean in and engage and find value. Now, the rest of your question is, do we ask these questions after we know their love language? Keep asking the questions every so often. I would recommend asking these questions at least, well, these types of questions at least once a year, maybe more frequently. Sprinkle them in to various meetings you have. Thanks for the question. For the disruptive question for love language number 3, we have Anonymous again asking, what would your response be for a customer who may say, why do you need to know? Or why are you asking? So I think that I want to say 2 things about that. First of all, I have a set of FAQs that if you hit me up on LinkedIn, I can share that answers this. I think that we have this idea that customers are closed off and won't answer questions that don't have to do with the day-to-day. And I understand where that comes from. And I think in some cases it's probably true. And if it's true, it's usually because the customer feels like we're not doing everything we said we were going to do, and they might not want to know why you need to know the other stuff when the basics aren't getting done. I have not heard that question. I have in several thousand customer discovery conversations, I don't get that question. So I can only assume that your thinking is, well, that's something that would keep me from asking the question, is they might want to know, why do you need to know that? Part of the reason I don't get that objection, and the teams that I coach don't either, is because the way you ask and set up these questions is you're basically saying, do you mind if we take a step back? We'd love to ask you some kind of bigger picture questions about your company's top level priorities and challenges. And that is the key to positioning the ask, instead of, if you feel the need to do that versus just jumping in and asking the question. Please show slide 1 again at the end of the presentation. So I believe we're going to be making this recording available afterwards. And so I'll defer to that because I don't want to screw up and go back to the wrong slide. My good friend Ty Rea, who helped inspire and helped me work through 2.5 years ago a lot of the ideas that you're seeing, says sometimes it's internal roadblocks like sales who do not want people asking these questions. What advice do you have to get sales bought into this approach? I've already tackled this, but if you need a bonus questions, also great work. Oh, thanks. So Ty, I would encourage you to put your answer into this Q&A, but I think I try to think of it as if sales has that much sort of say over what you say to customers, then I have some statistics. If they do get in the way, there are some statistics that I've presented, and again, I'm happy to share if you hit me up on LinkedIn, that the best salespeople, the highest performing salespeople, are the ones who talk less and ask better questions. And according to customers, customer discovery and listening are two of the 3 highest impact attributes that sales teams show, but they are terrible at it according to customers. So you can wave that in the face of any sales folks who don't like. So here's the thing, my little rant real quick. Sales is very good at hopefully moving customers down the sales cycle, the purchase journey, whatever you want to call it. And that means they're only going to ask questions and be as curious as they need to be to get to the next stage of the cycle. Therefore, they ask questions to get the answers they want. Our job in the post-sales world is trying to get the truth out of the customer. And in order to do that, you have to ask these types of questions to get the answers that you need to hear so that you can help the customer more fully. Ty says, again, to follow up, he said, I had sales give me one shot, come to one call and hear what I'm able to get from the customer. This has solved it every time. Well, it's quite good to hear, especially from you, Ty. Thank you so much. Okay. Next customer love language. Whoops. Number 4, be curious about our top business challenges and priorities, says the customer. What does this mean? So here I talked about opening the aperture. Here you're going to open it even wider. Don't just see them as a user. Don't just see them as the holistic view of their job, which is important, but understand where their company is heading. What's going on with the company? And to the person who asked, if a customer says, why do you need to know that? You're really going to wonder that on this question. But again, I've found customers to be fully engaged and open with the question I'm going to show you in a moment. So you have to remember something important, really important. Customers are experts in their business, in their job, not your product, right? So if you think about it, again, it's like interpersonal relationships or dating. If you ask someone about you, like, what do you think of me? Okay, you can do that. It might be a little awkward, but asking about them, being curious about them and their company is why customers engage so much, because we're basically saying, tell me some of the challenges that are going on with you, the priorities and challenges, and where are those coming from in the organization? In other words, you have an outcome you're trying to achieve. Why? What's the tailwind that is causing that? Another way to and I'm back on these boxes here, understand your customer's top business priorities and challenges that works really effectively is ask your customer, ideally, a customer that represents an ICP, to present for 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes on, I call it a customer reality brown bag, just what's happening in their world independent of your product, because it gives you context for what they're dealing with and how your product can be most valuable. They'll talk about what's going on in their business, what's going on in their marketplace with their customers. And a lot of times you'll uncover very important trends and dynamics that they're facing that either your product maybe can solve today, but the customer doesn't know it. It's not a sales call. It's a sort of again, it's like a debrief from the customer. So your product can help directly or indirectly, or again, it's that empathy, transparency thing, help understanding what's going on in their world. And by the way, understanding all of these things, you'll be in such a better position as a CSM or other in another customer facing role to be an authority internally in your company and become indispensable, because your team is the expert on what do customers need next? What is the ideal customer profile? Maybe we need to change it. What is the product market fit that we're seeing with real customers, not just prospects? And share these things with the product team or the sales team or the marketing team. How do we position the product? See, I think that is my one giant wish for customer success as a function, as a job function for leadership especially, is to advocate for customers internally and influence your company's agenda. That's what makes you indispensable, and then it turns around and the things that you say become reality, and then the customers realize more value and ultimately they spend more and stay longer. And then on the right, you'll see this last box is replace one QBR per year with something that I call the UBR. What is a UBR? Essentially, think of it as a curiosity call. It's essentially a conversation only about the other person, about the customer. No solving, no selling, no pivoting back to some agenda. There's no slides actually, because all you're doing is asking some disruptive questions, and then the customer will talk probably 70 to 80% of the time, and they'll give you lots of information on their top level business drivers, the contours and parameters of their job responsibilities, the main essence of their job that we talked about before. So the UBR is a time and a place where you can apply some of these questions in a concentrated setting to understand their love language and how they define value. So here is the bonus disruptive question that I use to uncover this particular customer love language. And I actually ask it it's my leadoff question. I ask it at the beginning of, let's say, a 30-minute discovery call. So if I could be a fly on the wall or sneak into your next board meeting or executive leadership meeting, what would I hear is the number one priority or challenge they're talking about? The number one. Again, and you see this theme of the biggest thing, the most important, the number one. Don't ever ask for lists. Lists make your job harder. Then you have to decode what's most important. Asking for the number one thing or the biggest thing is a little trick to get the customer to focus their answer and do some of the work for you. So now with this question, there are two reasons I ask it at the beginning. Number one, it gives you tremendous insight as to where the budget is flowing in their company. Where are the resources and energy headed? Not necessarily because it's going to benefit your product directly, but it helps you position your product accordingly to align with whatever their top priority is. If it's growth, you say, great, what are the key initiatives around growth? And then they'll give you another answer, and then you can keep working your way down. The second reason this is such a good leadoff question is that it disarms the customer, and they say, wow, this conversation is starting off very differently than every other vendor conversation I've ever had. And it's a differentiator for you, these questions and this approach, this curiosity, this authenticity of the questions, and the boldness of them in some way. It's a clear signal to the customer you're not just another CSM at another vendor trying to go down a checklist and go red, yellow, green. You're curious about their bigger picture. And as the great American poet Maya Angelou once said, people may not remember everything you said to them, but they will remember how you made them feel. So your job is to make your customers feel like you're really curious about them. I'm going to keep going for time constraints, and then we'll go back to the questions that I see the list of questions is expanding a little bit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our fifth and final customer love language. Bring us new ways to address challenges and priorities that are on our horizon. So, of course, you have to get an understanding of the world through the customer's eyes. And some of the questions that I've shared with you so far are designed to achieve that, is to get more insight into what is really important to them. But a lot of times you can combine those answers as a team. So that, and in other words, if you all ask the same question for, on 10 or 15 different customer meetings and get the same answer, it gives you the ability to kind of combine that. And I've done this exercise with CS teams where there is often a tremendous amount of commonality. If you say to the team, look, we're going to do a quick 15-minute exercise. If you had one chance to present one bullet point, one slide with one bullet point to one other department, what would the bullet point be and who would you present it to? So sometimes you get a feature for product. Sometimes it's a positive for marketing or sales, a positive comment. What's the one thing you'd want that other department to know that you think they don't know today? And again, there's so much commonality in the answers very often. And these answers give you the basis to authoritatively go to other teams, product, marketing, support, sales, finance, and to say, we've talked to dozens or maybe hundreds, if we've been able to scale it up, of customers, and we want to discuss a very big universal insight and a recommendation. And we want to collaborate with you. We just want to meet. We're not telling you what to do or build. We just want to meet with you, get your reaction, and see where to go from there, because we are representing the customer from this perspective. So the bonus disruptive question for this one: what's the one thing you and your team need to get better at this year, independent of our solution? Again, opening the aperture. Don't just ask about your product, and ask, appending the question by saying independent of our solution reminds them that you're not just interested in selling more of your product or getting them to renew. That's important, but it's to understand their world. So when I first started asking this question about 7.5 years ago, I was a little anxious that the question sort of implies that, well, the customer they're not great at everything. But that's kind of the beauty of the authenticity and transparency of this whole approach, is you have to ask real questions. And everyone knows that no one's perfect. Everyone knows there are things that need to improve. And customers, it turns out, are happy to open up and answer this kind of stuff. And another question that's really good for this. So at the last all hands meeting you had, because companies have a lot of all hands meetings, was there an overarching theme or goal or high priority initiative and how if there is, how does that affect your team and where you're headed? And And again, similar to the question for the previous love language, number 4, their answer helps you position the value of your product to align with their top priority. And that's how you make the case and become indispensable to them. And in this economy, I would argue that being indispensable might be the one bumper sticker that I would be advocating that everyone think about and talk about. So some of you, you'll have the recording, but some of you like to take screenshots. So this is for you, this next slide. I've combined everything on one here, so you can do whatever you want, take a screenshot. You can take a picture of it. It's a one-page cheat sheet, but I'm going to use this to highlight something that is two things that are very important. The stuff that's above this horizontal line, when you learn these, this is the stuff, it's like a gold mine. It's unexpected and unspoken. It's not written down anywhere. It's not really part of the conversation, right? It's not defined, as opposed to the stuff that's explicit and it's in the licensing agreement or the statement of work. And so up above the line is where all the magic is. It's understanding the job more holistically, being curious about their top business priorities. That's how you achieve sustainable growth. So down here, this will help you certainly retain by doing a great job at what you're supposed to be doing, what's obvious and explicit. This is where you grow and this is where you dominate. So think of it that way, that the more you understand and the deeper you understand your customers, the better for your business. I wanted to talk about the UBR, which I didn't want to just leave it hanging there, but it allows me to talk about something that, yes, I'm going to pick on QBRs for a moment. I know QBRs are having a rough time lately, especially if you read LinkedIn, a lot of shade on the old quarterly business review. So it's a good example of not the love language. So vendors say, so when you buy our software, at no charge, you get free meetings, 4 free meetings a year. We throw that in for nothing. And the meetings are to make sure you're getting the value you expect. And the subtext, of course, is we want to meet with you to hold your hand and make sure you're not leaving. But that's not the customer's love language. Customers are what they're thinking. And in some cases, maybe they're saying is, look, I got 15 vendors. I had a customer the other day that said they had 60 in their IT stack. And every one of them wants to meet 4 times a year. What am I supposed to do with that? And then the subtext is, candidly, these QBRs seem like they're all about you. That's why I'm not really that engaged in them. And so the antidote for that, what I call QBR fatigue, is this UBR. So take a look at this when you get the recording. I'm going to highlight a couple things that the UBR is go deckless, I call it, no slides. Instead of a QBR where you're just really kind of pushing the rock uphill to prove that you're delivering value or defend that the customer's saying there is no value, instead take a step back to uncover how they define value. And as I mentioned, your engagement level is, instead of you talking 75% of the time with slides, they end up talking 75% of the time. So, and the win isn't just, are they red, yellow, or green? That's important. But the win is getting insights about their business that'll help them stay longer and grow faster. And if you're wondering how to do it, you can either swap out, as I mentioned, 1 QBR per year for a UBR, or instead take your QBR or EBR and send the deck in advance. I know that might sound outrageous. Send the slides in advance and send a little 2-minute talk track video that says, hey, we're not going to go through every slide with you. Some of this is for you to know, but in the video, you're saying there are 3 things I want to highlight that we do want to talk about. And also, for God's sake, you don't need to have 6 people at every meeting do introductions of themselves. If you just put the LinkedIn bios and job titles in the agenda, and soon enough, you've got 15 extra minutes in the meeting, and you use that to have this sort of step back conversation. So I'm going to put up my closing slide here. If you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, here's the link. It's just search for Bob London. If you're interested in the questions, the insights, all that stuff, I do send out information on a regular basis like that. You can use this QR code or this link. Now, Corey, do we have time for a couple questions?
We do. Yeah, we have about 10 minutes. So we have some in the queue, but if you have additional questions that we didn't already address, please go ahead and type them in.
Yeah.
So
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I
Go
was
ahead.
just going to say, we have two questions that came in, I think, that are essentially asking kind of the same thing. But the question says, what would be the best advice for a team to use these questions? Let me rephrase this.
Is there one while you're talking? Is it like the bottom or next to bottom?
Oh, it's the top one, the top two questions. The question is, like, they use macros to answer a lot of their customer questions, and how do you recommend kind of being able to ditch those to be able to speak more directly to your customer?
Well, since I'm not in CS, tell me, Corey, give me your interpretation of giving macros as answers.
Yeah, I kind of think maybe like a scripted response. This is our help desk answer type thing.
Got it. Okay, so I think that that there are scripted answers for a reason. Hopefully, they are the right answer that's going to make the customer feel heard and give them some value. But that is, and as is noted in the question, we work in a world that's mostly help center. I don't know if that means that Edward, you're in customer support or help desk, but that's a little bit different. I would say if your job puts you in a situation where you have time with customers other than being reactive, then that's when you can use these more disruptive questions to kind of take a step back at the relationship level. But if you're in a situation where you're working on volume and scale and you have to get through customers quickly and get to them, then I think that's just a different setup. And I'm not sure if there is room to ask disruptive questions, to be honest. Corey, do you think I'm answering it in a way that's relevant?
I think so.
All right.
Let's see. So we have someone that left a comment and said, pertaining to the second question, which I think was the question about like asking about competitors. Any ideas for another way to word that second question? Even with my closest clients, I wouldn't feel comfortable asking it.
All right.
Well, just get over it, or
yeah. Well, I would say that without sounding like a jerk, my job is never to sell someone on asking a question, a particular question. My job is to explain to you why they work, is to give you my experience that they do work, and to tell you that the questions have been formulated in a way that reflects a lot of lessons learned. So the short answer is you can tweak the question that I've given you. But what I've learned is if I tell people that too often, then they just say like one person will say, so we're getting coaching and the coach told me to ask you this question. So I wouldn't do that. If you want to reword the question about competition, hit me up on LinkedIn and I'll give it some thought. Because I think the bigger question that I would ask you is, why are you uncomfortable? And I'm not challenging you. I'm saying I want to understand more about why people are uncomfortable. I understand why it might not feel completely natural or it feels bold to ask the question, but I wouldn't let that keep you from asking the question just the way it is. So whoever asked the question, hit me up on LinkedIn and we'll talk.
We have another question that says, would you ever include any of these questions as a response or comment point to an NPS survey, whether it's a detractor or a promoter? Yeah,
I thought you mean to ask it as part of the NPS?
I think a follow-up question to an NPS.
So by design, these are designed for conversations and very open-ended and let the customer go where they want to go. But I have been open to having them used as a survey. And I do think there's some applicability, like the competitive question. If you ask that question and give them a 1 through 5, anybody who says 5, I would go talk to a competitor pretty quickly. It gives you a chance to understand that and follow up. That could be very valuable and very important. I think I've gone from being very anti-survey to being very pragmatic and saying, you know what, I understand we all need to get data at scale. So let's figure out how to interpret these questions into a survey. I think it's a great point. I do have one client that is looking to, excuse me, you use these questions in more of an electronic survey, an online survey format, and we're working on that. So it's a great question. Can I pick one?
Yeah, please.
I don't know if it's the same anonymous attendee, but they're asking amazing questions. I have some clients that even when I pose these questions to try and learn more about their business and still try and think or respond to them, they still try and respond to my product and their goals around my product. Any recommendations to get them thinking outside the box? I have positioned the question as, let's take a step back. Yeah, I think by appending the question specifically, explicitly, by saying, what's on your whiteboard that has to be off in 90 days, independent of what we do. So if it has to do with our solution, great. But I really want to understand all the stuff that you're responsible for. Same with the board question. And I've had that same experience where you say, what if I could sneak into the board meeting, what would they be talking about? And they'll start saying, well, I don't know if they'd be talking about, your productivity app. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm asking about. I'm saying in general, independent of what we do. And that's fine. That's part of the process, is educating them. The reason they assume you're asking about your product is because that's what every vendor they've ever met with does. And that's not wrong. It's just, it gives us an opportunity to differentiate ourselves by pointing out, no, I'm not just asking about our product. I want to know, forget our product. I want to know what your world looks like.
Awesome.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, I think so. We have a question that says, what about an unreasonable, furious customer that won't settle for just being heard? Other than comping them, what's the best way to help calm them down? Well,
I'm going to be very explicit here and say that I am not a customer success professional. I come at this from the standpoint of an outsider who came up with an approach to interview customers that seems to be much more fruitful than the previous approach. I can't answer that question. I'm sorry. I would never just give you an off-the-cuff response to that because I'm not in the customer care business, right? So I would say that Corey might be able to point you to some other resource to answer that. There's a woman named Anita Toth, T-O-T-H, who does talks about how to have difficult customer conversations. I think that's still her area of expertise. So look up Anita Toth, T-O-T-H. Perhaps she might have an answer, or Corey can point you somewhere else.
Yeah. We had a question that was about tip number 4, asking about what's on your board or executive leadership meeting, whiteboard, and the question was, is this a way to go in a startup company, or maybe more applicable to a mature company?
Both, 100% both. It really doesn't matter. I think that the difference is, in a startup company, sometimes you're still trying to find your way in the market. Product market fit is not, it's not etched in stone. And so it's really more, that speaks more to how you use the answers. And by the way, there was another question right below that about number 4. And now, of course, I can't, maybe it got moved. There was another question about number 4. Customer, depending on the industry, the champion may not be able to answer the question because they're limited in what they can share with the CSM to anyone outside their company. So yeah, I think, and then they say you'd have to specify that you're not looking for something along the lines of corporate, you're not looking for something along the lines of corporate strategy, but more like an operational objective. So I wouldn't clarify the question that way while asking it. What I would do is say to them at the beginning of the call, look, you're going to get questions that you've never heard before. If there's something you feel uncomfortable with, and by the way, I say this all the time, no one ever takes me up on it. If there's something you're uncomfortable with, then just let me know, or you can skip the question. I have not found that there are too many things that they're not supposed to be giving you trade secrets. If you ask the questions the way I'm recommending it, they will talk about their priorities and the company's strategy in a way that serves your needs without them giving away anything sensitive. That's what I would say. Regulated industries, highly competitive industries, that's what I would say about that. It's a great question.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of our time here today. So just want to thank you again, Bob, and thank you all for joining us.
My pleasure.
And just wanted to remind everyone that we were recording today's session. I know a lot of questions came in about that. So we will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone that registered with a link to the recording and a PDF of these slides, so you can make sure to reference them, because people wanted to go back and look at some of them. So there will be a brief survey that pops up at the end of this webinar. I'd appreciate it if you just take a moment to provide your feedback. And thanks again for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the engagement.
Thank you.